Welcome to the most bizarre chapter in American holiday history, a moment when the President of the United States broke a 76-year tradition, split the nation down the middle, and created a holiday so controversial it earned its own mocking nickname, Franksgiving. This is the story of how Franklin Delano Roosevelt tried to save Christmas shopping and ended up creating two Thanksgivings, dividing families, scrambling football schedules, and proving that even the most powerful man in America couldn't simply rewrite tradition with the stroke of a pen. Roll back the calendar to understand how we got here. For most of American history, Thanksgiving bounced around like a football at a family reunion. Colonial celebrations happened whenever governors felt like it, sometimes in October, sometimes in December, once even in March. It was chaos, but nobody seemed to mind much because Thanksgiving wasn't yet the institution we know today. Then came Sarah Josepha Holly, a magazine editor who was absolutely convinced that America needed a unified day of gratitude. For 17 years, she wrote letters to presidents, governors, and anyone who would listen, campaigning tirelessly for a national Thanksgiving holiday. In 1863, right in the middle of the bloody Civil War, President Abraham Lincoln finally listened. On October 3, 1863, Lincoln issued a proclamation designating the last Thursday of November as the official Thanksgiving Day. It was a brilliant moment of national unity during America's darkest hour, and from that day forward, every president who followed Lincoln honored this tradition. The last Thursday of November became as American as apple pie. For 76 years, this worked perfectly fine, until 1939, the Great Depression and the Retail Rescue Plan. Now, to understand why Roosevelt would even consider messing with such a beloved tradition, you need to understand the world he was living in. By 1939, America had been stuck in the Great Depression for a full decade. Unemployment remained high, families were struggling, and even though Roosevelt's New Deal programs had provided relief, the economy had taken another downturn in 1937 and 1938. People were calling it the Roosevelt recession, and the president was under enormous pressure to find solutions. Enter the retail industry. In the late 1930s, there was an unwritten rule in American commerce. You didn't put up Christmas decorations or start Christmas sales until after Thanksgiving. It was considered tacky, inappropriate, even offensive. Thanksgiving was Thanksgiving, and Christmas was Christmas, and never the twain shall meet. But 1939 presented a peculiar problem. When you looked at the November calendar that year, you'd notice something unusual: 5 Thursdays. This meant that if Thanksgiving fell on the last Thursday as tradition dictated, it would be on November 30th. Christmas was exactly 25 days away, leaving only 3 full weeks for holiday shopping. This terrified retailers, Fred Lazarus Jr., who headed Federated Department Stores, started making noise. So did Lou Han, the general manager of the Retail Dry Goods Association. These business leaders looked at that abbreviated shopping season and saw disaster. Fewer shopping days meant fewer sales. Fewer sales meant more economic misery in an already struggling economy. They approached Harry Hopkins, Roosevelt's Secretary of Commerce, with a proposition that seemed simple enough: move Thanksgiving up by 1 week. just 7 days earlier. Create an extra week for Christmas shopping, boost retail sales, help lift the economy. Lowell Mellett, the executive director of the National Emergency Council, sent Roosevelt a memorandum warning that retailers were anticipating one of the worst shopping periods in years. The math seems straightforward. More shopping days equals more spending equals economic stimulus. Roosevelt, never one to shy away from bold action, agreed the announcement that shocked America on August 14, 1939. President Roosevelt held a routine press conference. Reporters asked their questions. The president gave his answers, and everything seemed perfectly normal. Then, almost as an afterthought, Roosevelt dropped a bombshell. "Oh, one more thing," he said casually. "Thanksgiving this year will be observed on November 23rd instead of November 30th. He explained that many parties had expressed interest in the earlier date, and there was, in his words, nothing sacred about the traditional observance. The room went silent. Then all hell broke loose. The nation divides. The reaction was swift, furious, and split almost perfectly along political lines. But it wasn't just about politics, it was about tradition. Family, football, calendars, and the very fabric of American life. Let's start with the states. When Roosevelt made his announcement, America had 48 states. Alaska and Hawaii wouldn't join the Union for another 20 years. In 1939, 22 states immediately sided with the president and agreed to celebrate Thanksgiving on November 23rd. 23 states dug in their heels and insisted on keeping November 30th, and 3 states, Texas, Colorado, and Mississippi, threw up their hands and declared they'd celebrate both dates. Both dates. 2 Thanksgivings. You couldn't make this up if you tried. The political divide was stark. A Gallup poll showed that Democrats supported the change by a slim margin of 52% to 48%. Republicans opposed it overwhelmingly, 79% to 21%. Overall, Americans rejected Roosevelt's plan by 62% to 38%. The newspapers had a field day. They coined terms like Democratic Thanksgiving and Republican Thanksgiving. They printed editorial cartoons showing confused turkeys. But the name that really stuck came from Charles White, the mayor of Atlantic City, New Jersey, who mockingly dubbed the new holiday Franksgiving. A sarcastic blend of Franklin and Thanksgiving that captured the public's frustration perfectly. The chaos unfolds, but the real chaos wasn't in the polling numbers or the political rhetoric. It was in the everyday disruption to American life. Consider the college football teams. In 1939, many universities scheduled their biggest rivalry games on Thanksgiving. As was tradition, these games were set for November 30th, suddenly. With half the country moving Thanksgiving to November 23rd, athletic departments faced an impossible choice. Play your games to empty stadiums because everyone's having Thanksgiving dinner, or reschedule everything and break conference rules that only permitted games through the Saturday following Thanksgiving, or just cancel the games altogether. Coaches were livid. One Arkansas football coach reportedly threatened that his state would turn Republican before they'd mess with the football schedule. Southern states, where college football was practically a religion, largely refused to adopt Roosevelt's new date. Then there were the calendar makers and schedulers. These poor souls had printed millions of calendars months in advance, all showing Thanksgiving on November 30th. Suddenly, their products were wrong, or half wrong, depending on which state. You lived in. Families faced gut-wrenching decisions. What if your parents lived in a state celebrating on the 23rd, but you worked in a state observing the 30th? What if your employer recognized one date, but your children's school district followed another? What if you wanted to travel to see relatives, but couldn't get time off because your state and their state disagreed on when Thanksgiving actually was? In eastern Iowa, where children attended schools across the border in Illinois, the situation became so absurd that some counties simply closed businesses on both days to avoid the confusion. This created a bizarre economic dead zone where communities essentially shut down for two separate Thanksgivings. The film Holiday encaptured the national bewilderment perfectly with an animated sequence showing a confused turkey hopping back and forth between the 3rd and 4th Thursdays of November, unsure of when it was supposed to be eaten. Retail workers faced perhaps the cruelest irony. In states like Nebraska, which stuck with the traditional date, postal workers were required to work on November 23rd, a day their own families were celebrating as Thanksgiving because the federal government followed Roosevelt's proclamation. They couldn't go home. They couldn't gather with loved ones. They were stuck at work while their turkey got cold. You might think that Roosevelt, seeing the chaos he'd unleashed, would admit his mistake and quickly reverse course. You would be wrong. FDR, ever confident in his decisions, doubled down. In October 1939, he issued his official proclamation. Then he announced that 1940 would follow the same pattern. Thanksgiving would again be celebrated on the second-to-last Thursday of November. November 21st, the second year of Franksgiving, saw the division shift slightly. 32 states and the District of Columbia observed the earlier date, while 16 states held firm with the traditional final Thursday, but the split remained. The confusion continued, and America still had two Thanksgivings. Roosevelt pressed on. In 1941, he proclaimed yet another early Thanksgiving. This time on November 20th, 32 states again followed the president's lead, while 16 refused. But by this point, something had become abundantly clear. This wasn't working. The Reckoning 1941, the Commerce Department conducted a comprehensive survey to determine whether Roosevelt's gamble had paid off. Retailers opened their books. The numbers came in. The economists crunched the data. The verdict: there was no significant expansion of retail sales due to the change. All that chaos, all that division, all those disrupted family gatherings and scrambled football schedules, it had accomplished nothing. The extra week of shopping hadn't boosted the economy. It hadn't saved Christmas. It hadn't pulled America out of its economic doldrums. Roosevelt had bet on commerce and lost to tradition, and then something truly remarkable happened. Something Time magazine noted was virtually unprecedented for Franklin Roosevelt's presidency. He admitted he was wrong. During a press conference, Roosevelt picked up a memorandum and said evenly, there was one thing more. He announced that he would support legislation to fix Thanksgiving's date permanently. The headline in Time magazine said it all. President admits mistake. Congress steps in. In December 1941, with America freshly traumatized by the attack on Pearl Harbor, and plunging into World War II, Congress decided that the nation had enough problems without arguing about when to eat turkey. They passed a joint resolution. And on November 26, 1941, President Roosevelt signed it into law. The bill established that Thanksgiving would be celebrated on the fourth Thursday of November. Not the last Thursday, as tradition had dictated, but the fourth Thursday. This was actually a brilliant compromise. In most years, the fourth Thursday and the last Thursday are the same day. But in those years, when November has 5 Thursdays, Thanksgiving would fall on the fourth one, avoiding the late date problem that had started this whole mess in the first place. Starting in 1942, America would once again have a unified Thanksgiving. Most states immediately fell in line, but true to form, Texas held out until 1956-17. Years of stubbornly celebrating on the last Thursday before finally giving in and aligning with federal law. The epilogue here's the beautiful irony of the Franksgiving fiasco, even though Roosevelt's plan failed spectacularly. It actually changed Thanksgiving forever. Before 1939, Thanksgiving floated on the last Thursday of November, wherever that fell. After the resolution of 1941, it was anchored to the fourth Thursday, ensuring that the holiday would always land between November 22nd and November 28th, creating a consistent shopping window for retailers every single year. Roosevelt didn't get what he wanted in 1939, but he accidentally created the system we still use today, and that extended shopping season he fought for.